What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Do You Know, where we give you uncommon black facts. My name is John Dewberry, and always remember, the more you know your history, the more liberated you are. On today's episode, we have a man who used to throw down in the kitchen, apparently, man, way back in the day. A man who went by the name of Hercules Washington. Washington being his slave last name because he was a slave of none other than, yes, President George Washington. Yes, presidents used to own slaves. If you didn't know, George Washington owned many. But Hercules was one of the non-slave Africans that George Washington brought with him to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, which was the nation's capital at the time. And he became the first cook in the presidential household. And he was so fiery in the kitchen that he became described and known as a celebrated artiste. So Hercules prepared all the meals for George Washington, his family, his private guests, all his official guests. And his food was so good, man, because we all know leftover. A lot of times leftovers are good the next day. You know, the food is sit in all the flavors and it congeal and then they sit right and it be bomb that next day. So his leftovers was so fire that he ended up selling them to the general public, and he ended up making $100 to $200 a year, which back in that time was about $5,000 today. And of course, you know, black people, we like our luxuries. We like to look fly, and our clothes and stuff like that. So that's exactly what he spent his money on: clothing and just expensive luxuries and jewelry and things like that. And honestly, like, what else are you going to spend your money on as a slave? Like, you might as well live it up. Unfortunately, all his specialties and his ingredients is lost in history. But he was known for braised fish, oyster stew, custards, puddings, and fresh bread. And here's my favorite part. He was one of the only few, probably the only one, I believe, to escape successfully from George Washington and become free. So there was this law called the Act for the Gradual Abolition of Slavery, which basically meant if a slave was in Pennsylvania for more than 6 months, they automatically became free. So what George Washington used to make Hercules do was take periodic trips back to Virginia to break it, to get around that, and then return to Pennsylvania so he could remain a slave. He was trying to be tricky with it, but Hercules knew. He knew what was going on. He's not an idiot. He's a smart man. And so he knew, but he did that anyway to build trust with George Washington. So one day, George Washington left Philadelphia to return to Mount Vernon, and Hercules stayed behind to help with his arrival when George Washington returned. But he used that opportunity to dip, and he successfully fled. He became a free man. Unfortunately, he did leave three kids behind, which is the weird part of the story. But I guess he just used that opportunity to, do what he had to do. I don't know all the circumstances and all the things that was going through his head. But anyway, when George Washington found out he left, he sent men after him to capture him and return him, but they never could find him. So yeah, man, he never returned to slavery, and his later life is kind of unknown, and locations unknown. They don't really know where he went. Different reports, but for the most part, they didn't really know. And the part I said about him leaving his children, later his daughter was asked, they remained slaves, and later his daughter was asked, like, you must be deeply upset that you'll never see your father again. And she responded, on the contrary, I'm very glad because he is free now. So yeah, that's kind of like the bittersweet part of it. The dad got free, but his 3 children had to remain slaves, and it's just a sad part of the story. But yeah, man, Hercules Washington. I don't really want to say his last name that much. It's not really his, but he's basically celebrated as the first celebrity first celebrity chef in America. And I just think, like, I don't know, it just shows like how black people can be, can just grow and be talented and use their gifts in the midst of captivity and bondage, and sometimes there is a game we have to play sometimes, and it's all about knowing that right moment when to break free. So yeah, rest in peace to Mr. Hercules. Whatever your real last name is, not gonna say Washington because that's not your last name. But yeah, so I hope you guys learned something new on this episode. We'll see you next time.